Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of BiblioTech On Air. I'm Rosanna.
Hi, Ruby.
And today we're going to be talking about our latest Libros and Libations pick, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. So that was your pick, Ruby. And it was a pretty good one. A lot of discussion, very interesting read.
I heard a lot about it. Like, it was one of the books that everyone must read. So I was like, okay, check it out.
I agree. It was very informative. Had a great pace, but we'll get into all of that in just a second. Quick summary on Henrietta Lacks. The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot tells the story of Henrietta Lacks, an African-American woman whose cervical cancer cells were taken without her knowledge in 1951 and became the first immortal human cell line known as HeLa cells, which have been used extensively in medical research worldwide. The book explores the ethical implications of this practice, particularly regarding informed consent and the exploration of marginalized communities, as Henrietta's family remained unaware of the use of her cells for decades and did not benefit financially from the vast scientific advancements they enabled.
Wow.
It's a doozy.
It's a doozy. But getting right into it.
Henrietta Lacks cells, known as HeLa, became one of the most important tools in modern medicine. What do you think the book says about the relationship between science and ethics? How does Henrietta's story challenge the way we view scientific process?
I thought it was crazy because, I feel like ethics and science has come a long way. Like, it's not scientists digging up dead bodies anymore.
You would hope so.
Without anyone's consent. But yeah, it's just crazy to think the way, like, it was back then. Just I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but like what scientists needed to do in order to further in research. And it's like, was this like a good or bad thing? Like, if this never happened, then we would have never progressed as far as we did.
Right. HIPAA and OSHA, they weren't a thing at the time.
Yeah.
So patient consent was basically
non-existent.
Not an issue. Yeah, non-existent. And like you said, who knows? And that was a fair point of discussion too, where it was like, if it weren't for these advancements, where it would be right now, if they hadn't done what they did and taken Henrietta's cells, but at the same time, there was such a kind of disregard for that.
Yeah, it's like they could have at least given her some credit. If they were just going to take her cells and be it, like giving her family something or even her credit, like a lot of people said.
Get her name right.
Exactly. I was like, the one thing that a lot of people at Libros were complaining about was the fact that they couldn't even get her name right. It's like, wow.
Helen Lane.
Yeah.
Who is that?
All these different variations of her name when it was just plain and simple Henrietta Lacks.
Yeah. Like, do that much. The doctor that... So there was a moment in the book that we did bring up where... when they were about to leak like that stuff to the press, and the doctor that like took the sample from her was just kind of like, why do y'all need to know who they came from? You know, like, what's the big problem about that? The fact that, you know, her family already doesn't know, we can't get this poor lady's name right.
It's crazy, but it just shows, like, I know Dulce brought up a good point that scientists just like are continuously separating like the people from the research. So like the scientists are just looking at everything as just research, as just cells. Like, they didn't come from a person. You know, even the one lady who was collecting all the cells from all the different people, like, she didn't connect Henrietta Lacks cells until she saw like the body or something like that.
Like, this came from a person.
Yeah.
Which
Crazy.
is like, to an extent, it's like, yeah, that's something you'll have to do. You have to learn how to do, compartmentalize a little bit.
I think what blew my mind the most was like, not a lot of people heard of Henrietta Lacks, like especially people in science degrees. Like, I was in a science degree for a little bit. I never heard of Henrietta Lacks. Dulce even brought up a point. She was like, I can't recall if I ever heard her name being mentioned in any of like the science classes I took. And even Romeo and Milena both being history majors, and Milena having taken a lot of African American studies, she's like, I never heard of Henrietta Lacks. So,
which just goes to show the extent of, you know, how unknown she is.
Yeah,
still.
how like watered down this is, and how I mean, she should definitely be recognized a lot more than she is. Like, give her her own day too to be recognized,
like nationally, because she has that local day,
yeah,
I believe.
yeah.
But like something more
Nationally, like I mean, you changed like the face of medicine.
yeah, like thankfully now they're doing a lot more. Like the Smithsonian, they've done a portrait that like it's very beautiful for her. They're starting to recognize her more in like conferences and stuff. Like we saw in the book, Deborah was able to speak at some of those. So it's been gradually happening, but
Not happening fast enough that,
Yeah.
that I'd like to see.
merits a lot more.
Yeah.
But let's get into the next question. So the book explores the lives of Henrietta's descendants who also had no idea about her immortal cells for many years. What were your thoughts on the Lax family experience, and how did they react to learning about Henrietta's contribution to science, which she had her oldest daughter, the two sons, and I believe that was it. No, three sons. It was three sons. It was Lawrence, Zachariah, and Sonny, and then of course Deborah being the main of her children that we follow around,
And then Elsie.
and then Elsie, who we did not speak a whole lot about, but Elsie, she did not live long. She lived to be about 15 years old, and after a while, she was diagnosed with epilepsy and I believe something else that kind of left her with like the mind of an infant.
Yeah.
But from what we learned in the book, Henrietta
Wasn't
looked
it?
after
Am
her,
I?
like-
I mean, forgive me if I'm wrong, but didn't they diagnose her with like idiocy or something like that?
Yeah,
Something
at the
like
time
very,
that was
very that hurt Deborah to learn.
Yeah.
She's like, I can't believe they diagnosed her with this.
right, because that's what they would call it at
Yeah.
the time, and now like that's something very antiquated.
Yeah, and so they put her in a home, and then
Yeah, which Henrietta, she was against. She didn't want to have to do it, but ultimately she was like, well, there's really no choice.
Yeah, all the doctors and everything were telling her this is what's best for her.
And something that's also like explored in the book, like you don't question the doctors.
Yeah.
Like you just kind of like go along for the ride with them.
But I hope that their family got some sort of closure in this. I mean, in the end, it kind of seemed like it when Deborah and Zechariah, that's how you pronounce his name, right?
It specifically mentions in the book, I want to say it's like Zechariah.
Oh, okay.
But I'm not 100. I don't 100% remember. Which apologies if we're butchering that.
Well, both of them, when they got to go to see their mother's cells, and that moment was just very powerful. Where they're just like, "Wow, this is my mother's cells," and then like that doctor too that introduced them to the cells was just such a good soul. He was like,
Honestly,
"Oh,
one
thank
of the
you!
few.
Like your mom did such an incredible, she made an impact in today's world, and thank you guys. Like, thank your mom for the significance." Like he was able to explain this because I don't think anyone took the time to explain to the family, explain what the cells are, because like I think this whole time they were thinking like they were just taking like bits of her body or like pieces of her.
Right.
They didn't understand like that. No, they're her cells.
Like something so microbial.
But the fact that he was able to explain that to her and they were able to see the cells, and he was like, take a vial home. And they're like, what are we going to do with the vial of our mother's cells? But I mean, that's something like to give them some kind of closure.
Right.
I mean, Deborah had such a rough history, and her not knowing her mother because she passed away when she was 1, I think, when Deborah was 1. Very, very young.
Yes.
So she obviously had no idea who her mother was.
And it seemed to have affected all of them in a different way. Like Zechariah, he was just an angry guy, and he thinks that because he was in his mom while she was fighting the cancer, like that was all that fight, and that just made him an angry person. The only one that I think, even though like he still suffered emotionally, was Sonny.
So he was the Crazy Joe, right? Or which one was Crazy Joe?
The one that was in jail for a while. That was Zechariah.
That was Zechariah.
Yeah. Sonny, he was the one who married off to Bobette, and Bobette was the one that would like try to protect the kids, because thanks to their lack of a mother figure, they grew up abused by their dad's new wife.
Yeah.
They were victims of SA and harassment in their family. Like they went through so much, and it does make you wonder if Henrietta were around, would they have gone through all that? Probably not. Probably not.
But yeah, I hope. I mean, I don't. Does it explain? Well, forgive me if I'm wrong, but in the book too, I think Rebecca Skloot was saying like, oh, um, that she was gonna donate some of the profit from the book to a college fund for descendants of Henrietta Lacks or something
Right.
like
It
that.
was the Henrietta Lacks Scholarship Fund, I
Yeah.
believe, and that was mentioned in the book, in the narrative, and also like in the other pages,
Yeah.
like the credits and stuff. Like, you know, the initial funds from this book will go into those funds for her descendants. And I want to say she cleared it with Deborah too. Like Deborah was like, we don't want money, but what we can do is, you know, make sure like our future descendants are educated and stuff.
Hopefully that gives them the kind of closure they need.
I would hope so, but I mean, well, we'll probably get into this in a little bit, so I'll put a pin in that. But let's jump into the next question. Did this book change your perspective on medical research and patient consent? If so, how?
It did. Like, I remember we were joking how Dulce said, she was like, it made me realize how when I go to the doctor's office, they just throw all these forms at me and I'm just like, oh, okay, I'm just going to sign them. And that's it. Because, I mean, like, you're afraid you're not going to get seen if you don't sign them. Like, who knows what will happen if you don't sign them? We kind of just think like, oh, yeah, we have to do it, you know, in order for them to, I don't know, like, get our medical history and things like that. So that's what I think. That's why I'm just like, yeah, I'll just sign it, whatever.
And you think like with all these, you know, like again, HIPAA, you think like, oh, okay, I should be safe.
I should be somewhat protected.
But after hearing this, and granted, that was decades ago, and that did affect, you know, minorities much more disproportionately. That's not to say it still can't happen today, you know? I mean, once your blood goes to the back, you don't know what they're doing with it.
Yeah, I mean, even in the book, they described how if you're like at a doctor's office and you like blow your nose or something, like your waste is like not your waste anymore. Like anyone has the right to.
I'm taking that home with me.
I'm making clones of this person that I saw. But yeah, like that's just crazy to think. Like once it's out of your body, like you don't have any rights to it anymore. That's what it seems like. But I mean, I don't know. It's like such a rough line. I feel like hospitals have 10 billion lawyers to help them.
I mean,
like,
they have to.
Because I'm like, how are scientists doing it today, like ethically, to further progress our research and things like that? Like, I don't know. I know Milena and Dulce were saying like, oh, they would donate their body to science or anything like that when they pass away. But then things like this just make you think, and it's like, wait, what's gonna happen to my body after that?
Yeah,
that makes me a little sus. But
or like if you're an organ donor, then it's like,
yeah,
okay, sure, like you're an organ donor. How far is this gonna go?
Yeah,
like, is it just gonna be organs? Are y'all gonna start taking like little blood samples and doing other things?
Like y'all gonna, I don't know, like did something from me advance the medical world and I would never know about it?
Please, like, you know, if that happens, just make sure my dogs have dog food in their bowl and they have a home, you know? Just make sure they're set up. It's all good.
Just make sure I can go to the doctor without having to go into debt, which is what this family did, honestly. Like, that was their push the entire time. They just were like, my mother literally advanced the medical world. We should be able to go to the doctor
at the very
freely,
least.
Yeah, because, like, of course, a lot of them had to deal with some sort of sickness.
And we did touch on that they got no kind of compensation at any point in that we knew of. They got no money, no, you know, recognition until much later. They still got their blood like taken from them unwillingly, even after finding out about their mom. It's so wild how these people were just taken advantage of.
Yeah, very, very,
100%. And it does kind of make you want to be like, when you next time you go to the doctor, like, so you're gonna take my blood. What are you gonna do with it? Is it gonna be disposed of properly? Are y'all gonna sell it to like vampires? What's going on? Rebecca Skloot's own journey to uncover Henrietta Lacks' story is an important part of the narrative. How did her personal involvement in the story affect your reading experience? Girl was ride or die. She was going everywhere.
Yeah, she was so trusting of like the people, like to get the information that she wanted. I was like, man, she's going to this in the book like sketchy grocery store that she doesn't know if it exists. She's like riding in cars with all these just strangers. I'm like, man, she was very trusting in order to get to the bottom of it. and to learn who Henrietta Lacks was.
Yeah, like just the cast of people that she met, between like, the meeting the family, dealing with like their outbursts, which understandable. And then you have again the grocery shop clerk who's very sweet and tried to help her out whatever way she could. The other people around town who were just like, well, you'll want to go here, follow me to this area, or get in my car and I will take you. That is some dedication.
Very trusting. Yeah, she had to be very patient. I mean, her professor even gave her like a list of do's and don'ts to do once she does come in contact with Henrietta Lacks.
Right.
Like, be very patient in the fact that their family has gone through just this tremendous amount of pain.
Yeah, I forgot about that, the list of do's and don'ts, because it was, I don't know about you, but in the book I felt like I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like Rebecca, she was very patient and very like, open about how she was handling everything and then the progress of her research. But it always felt like the family and then myself as the reader just waiting for that other shoe to drop. Like, okay, when's it going to hit the fan? When is something going to come out that's like going to affect the family negatively?
I mean, Deborah had that little outburst with her too. She was like, who are you really working for? What are you really doing with this information? And she didn't even like trust her. Like when she kept popping in and out of Rebecca's room to make sure that she wasn't like digging into further files that she didn't want her to get her hands on or whatever. Yeah, I mean, she was like trusting, but she was like, no, I mean, we've been taken advantage of. I'm still gonna, I don't know the word I'm looking for. I'm still oversight this.
Yeah, like you only have permission to go through so much, and that can be, just taken away at any time. So I want to say I think she was fairly respectful when you think about everyone else that came into, the family's life. I do think she was respectful. But it was brought up also that there were some things that she did write about that may have been, maybe embellished or just kind of thrown in there because we don't know how accurate, everything was.
Yeah, she describes it in the beginning too. I mean, that she tried, like her quotations, she tried doing word from word, exactly the way that the Lacks family were saying it. But I mean, of course, things can get lost in translation.
Yeah, and I'd like to think with so much oversight from the family and her being so involved with it, I'd like to think that if there were anything that were untrue or like problematic, they probably would have called her out on it or just been like, don't say that about our mom or that's, why would you say that? So that's what I think. On a similar topic, the book highlights issues of race, class, and medical ethics. How did these themes resonate with contemporary discussions in science, healthcare, and society as a whole?
Society's messed up. Sometimes.
We've been new.
As a whole.
We've been new.
Yeah.
But we see it fairly early on with John Hopkins, where Henrietta is going to get her cancer treatments. It's a hospital that helps anyone regardless of race, income. If you're poor, you can go there and not have to worry about paying them back. Even though segregation was still going on at the time, they didn't care if you were black, white, whatever, you could go there too. But with that said, that kind of also makes you think, like the way I was thinking about it was John Hopkins employees and stuff probably thought like, oh, we're providing these people free health care. So the least that, we can do, or the least that they can do is, give us these samples, give us, a chance to maybe do some further research, stuff like that.
And that was like a known thing within the African American community
very
as well.
Much so.
They were like, you go to John Hopkins, like they're doing like shady stuff with your stuff.
Like they were genuinely worried about being snatched up off the street. They would say that people from John Hopkins would come, and if you were like by yourself or whatever, you would get snatched up for research.
I mean, they weren't completely wrong.
I mean, we didn't hear about Henrietta getting snatched up, but her cells did.
No, yeah.
which isn't fair. But I mean, it definitely goes to show privilege too. Definitely a lot of privilege because if it were, maybe like a white American or, upper class person, you can almost guarantee this wouldn't happen. This wouldn't happen. Or if it did and they found out about it, they would have gotten the recognition. They would have gotten their name out there. Like, yeah, you know, those are my cells that helped further this research that's been helping, you know, everyone across the world. And I think that's still kind of a thing today where I know as women, their pain tends to be a bit more dismissed. Like, oh, you know, you can give birth to a child, so whatever pain you're feeling right now, that's nothing. You're dismissed, you know, and I can't imagine that as a, you know, minority and a woman, someone, you know, that goes even further. So you would think that maybe from Henrietta's time up until today, a lot of that would have changed, but there's still a lot of similarities like there.
Yeah,
there's still,
I mean, you hear stories all the time of women going to like the doctors and being dismissed, and you know, they know themselves. Like Henrietta knew herself.
Exactly.
She was like, something's wrong. She literally felt the tumor, and none of the doctors were just like, no, like that's nothing or whatever. But she's like, something's wrong with me, you know. But like we still see that today.
Absolutely, absolutely.
It's crazy.
Like you still have to fight for that. Like fight for the doctors to recognize something is wrong with me.
I mean, like women, I feel like women downplay a lot of things too. Like, I heard, like women, are sometimes less likely to go be seen at the doctor as well. Like they'll just like write it off. They'll be like, I've had this pain in my back for like days or whatever. And this happens and this happens. And they'll be like, no, you had like a stroke or you had like something pretty crazy going on and you're just still going on about your daily life. Yeah. Living with it. Like that happens. And
also you can contribute that not just to like dismissive, but also like when you think about it from a class perspective, because most likely upper class people who are comfortable, they're going to have health insurance, whether, you know, through the marketplace or through their, you know, job. But lower class people that don't have insurance, they're not going to be able to afford to go to the doctor. So there's going to be that discrepancy too, where it's like, well, yeah, we're not going to see a lot of lower income people because they can't afford it because they don't have health insurance. And, you know, that's kind of, it seems like you would want to think a lot's changed since then. And when you think about it, it's like,
not that much.
Not a whole lot.
Not a whole lot.
No. The scientists in the book treat the HeLa cells as an object of study, while Henrietta's family sees her as a mother, wife, and a human being. How did the book explore the tension between viewing scientific subjects as tools or as people?
It's crazy because I know scientists like sometimes have to do that, like separate the people from the research. Because I mean, if you're like too emotionally involved, like that's a lot to take on, you know. But then again, like the family is just like, no, think of this as like as a person, you know, be a little bit more, I don't know, understanding in that sense.
A bit more humane.
I feel like that's a really, I don't know, I feel like that's a really gray line sometimes. Like you hear about nurses and doctors in hospitals. I mean, the stuff they go through every day, the things they deal with, I mean, see death pretty much like on the daily. You have to separate yourself from that sometimes. And that can be hard. I mean, I can't even imagine.
Yeah. Like you just, what happens when you connect with that, you know, like a bit too much on an emotional level? Does that change your work or your research? Like, you know, does that affect it, hinder it? Does that make you want to go further because maybe you knew this person so well, so you want to do something out of respect for them?
Like, how does it affect it?
Yeah, it can go either way, I definitely think. But here we see a lot more of the, I would guess, negative aspect of it. Like you mentioned earlier, the female scientist who was
in charge of the cells.
Yeah, in charge of the cells. Like she was fairly dismissive until, like you said, she saw Henrietta's body in like the autopsy room, and she was like, "Oh my God, these came from an actual person." As opposed to like Guy, the scientist who took the cells. Like I don't think there's ever a moment we recognize where he you know thinks of Henrietta as a person, just her cells. And even that we see with his own, you know, life later on, where he ends up getting cancer, and he's like, "Take my cells." And make them the next immortal. Like, you know, it's like at that point, he's just seeing himself as like scientific research too. So what did you think about Deborah and her quest to learn more about her mother? Describe her evolving relationship with Rebecca throughout the book.
It was, I liked how Deborah was just like, all she wanted to know was just information about her mom. She was like, I want to know her favorite color. I want to know like what she liked to do. I just want to know more about her. And I feel like she was able to get that a lot.
Yeah.
Like we go back and hear her stories of her past and things like that. So that was a nice progression to see.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, what anyone who probably didn't get to know their parent,
Mm-hmm.
that you want the simple things. You don't need to know about, like,
Mm-hmm.
well, I don't know. That's complicated, because on one hand you want to know the regular things,
Mm-hmm.
but then you also want to know, like, what did they go through,
Mm-hmm.
what happened, how did they ultimately die, and Deborah, she gets all of that.
Mm-hmm.
She learns the full story, but even then, it's still kind of sad to think about, like, these are just such simple things, and
Yeah.
at the end of the day, she's still, her mother's daughter,
Mm-hmm.
and the child in her just wants to know what she missed out on.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that goes for the other kids too,
I don't know much about her relationship with Rebecca throughout the book. I mean, obviously she was more trusting with her towards the end, but she
Yeah.
still had, like we mentioned earlier,
her reservations.
yeah, she still had her reservations, which is very fair.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. Other than that, I don't know too much about their relationship.
Right, because we get it from Rebecca's perspective,
Mm-hmm.
and from what she made it seem like, they ultimately did get to have, like, a good relationship
Mm-hmm.
to the point where it was kind of a friendship.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that's just her perspective. We don't know
yeah.
if Deborah may have felt the same
Yeah.
way, or if, maybe Deborah was just kind of like, okay, this white woman here is
Yeah.
just coming in and doing her job and just
Mhm.
working for us.
Mm-hmm.
But it got to a nice point for them, I think,
Yeah.
because she would kind of stay up to date with the family too.
Mhm.
Like, they would stay in contact even after, like,
Mm-hmm.
the book got published, I
Mhm.
believe, which took well over a decade. So if I'd like to think, if you're working with someone for that long, you're going to have a relationship regardless, whether it's familial, friendly,
Mm-hmm.
there's going to be some kind of connection there
Yeah.
that just transcends,
Mm-hmm.
because that's a lot. You're helping, well, not helping, but you're working with Deborah through her trauma, finding out
Mhm.
what her family went
Mhm.
through. You're, uncovering all of these hidden truths about
Mm-hmm.
the process.
They trauma bonded.
It's a trauma bond.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, it's definitely a trauma
Mhm.
bond. Oh, and also going back to Deborah, not only was it her goal to find out about her mom, but she also wanted to find out more about Elise,
Oh,
which
that's
we
right.
did talk
Yeah,
about
her
a little bit at the
sister.
beginning, and she found out a lot about that. Like, that
Mhm.
was a good portion of, like, the research too. Like,
Mm-hmm.
they went to was it the hospital, or was it like a center where they kept, like,
Yeah, it was like a
medical
center.
Okay.
Mhm.
And they were lucky enough that the gentleman who was, like, most of the records around that time had to be disposed of, but they were fortunate enough to find stuff about Elise. So not
Mhm.
only was it just Deborah uncovering, the truth about her mom and stuff, but also about her sister.
Mhm.
And she was lucky enough to even, like, find another picture and keep that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it was definitely a lot of,
Mm-hmm.
kind of reconnecting with their family's past
Yeah.
in a way.
Mm-hmm.
How did the contributions of Henrietta cells shape the landscape of medicine, from polio vaccines to cancer treatments? Do you think this innovation was worth the personal cost to Henrietta and her family? It's another complicated
I know, that's
one.
very complicated.
Because what ultimately happened was Henrietta's husband was sleeping around,
Mm-hmm.
caught syphilis,
Mm-hmm. Gave it
gave
to
it to Henrietta, and that kind of
was
triggered
what progressed everything.
yeah, kind of help
Mm-hmm.
that cancer do what it did.
So it's
in
like,
its
what if
most
that
horrible
never?
way.
What if that never happened? What if her
Right.
husband was faithful? What if I don't know?
Yeah, like, would the cell thing still have happened? Would she have still gotten cancer?
Mm-hmm.
Would it have developed the immortal cells? Like, there's so many what ifs
Yeah.
to this.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, like, the family suffering, obviously that's never a great thing. That's never going to be worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to say, that their suffering contributed to the greater good.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a hard line
It
to
is.
toe.
It's
It's
very
such a hard line. And that's something that was just constantly going on in the book,
Yeah.
where it's like, we're getting all these advancements. That's great. But what about the family?
Yeah.
But what about the
What about
family?
the cost?
What
Yeah.
about the family?
Mm-hmm.
It definitely kind of gets your moral compass going.
Yeah, I mean, that brings up a very great discussion. It's like, what do you think? where does your moral compass lie?
Yeah, and it makes you think, like, what if they had just simply asked Henrietta? Like, what if they were just like, hey, so while we're here doing this stuff or your treatments, do you think you can contribute, like maybe just ask and word it like, if we get something viable from this sample we take of you, you're going to help millions of people, which is exactly what happened. And I think, like, if you were to word it like that, then they probably could have gotten like a yes,
Yeah. I mean, or like giving her some kind of compensation in the beginning.
Exactly.
Like, hey, I'm going to give you $20 for just a little vial of your cells, something like that, which I feel like, I don't know, like plasma donating, like people donate their plasma all the time and they get some sort of compensation for it. Like, but of course took that many years to get to this point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's crazy. It did change, like got the polio vaccines and cancer treatments and it's wild to think.
Which also, it's kind of funny to think about now how people are taking that kind of stuff for granted. But that's probably a discussion for another time. All right. So overall, what were your thoughts about the book? Did you like it or did you?
I liked it. Like I said, I never heard of who Henrietta Lacks was before I read this book. And I still haven't watched the movie. I want to watch the movie with Oprah Winfrey. Because she plays Deborah, I believe. And so we get Deborah's point of view in the movie. So I want to see how they interpreted that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I liked the book. I thought it was a really good read.
Same. It was one of those, like, once I started it, I did not want to put it down.
Yeah.
In fact, like right from the prologue, because I was like, okay, well, let me just get a little sample of this. The moment I started reading those few pages, for me, it was just like, oh, I'm locked in. This is going to be fascinating.
And indeed it was.
And it was. And then, like you said, the movie is starring Oprah Winfrey, and it came out in 2017, I believe. So it kind of makes you wonder, is there anything that's come up between when the book was released in 2010 and 2017 that, like,
they added in there?
Yeah. So I think it would be worth a watch. But funny enough, Henrietta Lacks was also a banned book at some point.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was a banned book because it had too much graphic information.
It did. I mean, like, the book is very detailed in, like, some of the SA that the family went through and some of the trauma that the family went through. And we were, like, discussing it, too. We're like, did the book need to have that? What do you think?
The scientific stuff, I think so. As unfortunate as it is, I think, like, maybe, like, where they mention, like, the incest and the SA stuff, well, maybe not the extent of detail, but I do think it was important to mention that just to see, like, how much the family did go through.
Yeah.
Like, not
it's like, we're not gonna diminish, like, I don't know,
right,
or water down, like, what they went through. They obviously went through trauma, and I don't know. Yeah, I agree. I mean, they didn't probably have to go as in much detail as they did, but it gives us some sort of backstory.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, the book is kind of coming from a researcher, and it's going to be her job to put as much of the truth and facts as she can out there. So there's kind of that perspective for it too. But overall, definitely a great read. If you guys are interested in checking it out, we have both the ebook and audiobook available on cloudLibrary. Again, my opinion, I'd say 4.5 out of 5. It was really good. One of my favorite things I've read this year.
Definitely.
Great pick, Ruby.
Thank you.
That was her pick again. But yeah, any other thoughts? Or okay. Alrighty. So make sure you tune in to our Instagram pages as well as our website for information on our next Libros and Libations pick, Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. That's going to be in January. So that's going to be a nonfiction one, I believe. Or I mean, a fiction one.
I think it's fiction.
It's fiction. That's what I meant. But yeah, make sure y'all tune in. Again, that is Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng, available on cloudLibrary. But thanks for tuning in, y'all. And again, I hope y'all have a great time with this episode. For those of you who may have missed yesterday's Libros or were just too tired to go.
We'll see you next time.
Until the next time, I'm Rosanna.
I'm Ruby.
We'll catch you on the next episode.
Bye.